Excellent. Well, as you said, Chris provided a superb segue. And Chris, I'll just shout out to our favorite volume, Morgoth's Ring, where my text appears. And note that the first few slides in the presentation will give a little bit of background to that text, so that those of you who haven't read it have a little bit more context to work with. To the other, Athrabeth, Finrod and Andreth. My focus today is not merely the topic of Finrod and Andreth's conversation, although intriguing, but rather the process and the tenor or spirit of the conversation itself. The dialogue stages the struggle of two people who, although they may long for connection and understanding, frequently talk at cross purposes, feel belittled, or refuse the claims of their partner. Repeatedly, both Finrod and Andreth must take the words of the other on faith, must respect the lore of the other as valid and indeed inspiring, and finally must see one another in new and at times revelatory ways. Through Finrod and Andreth, we see how the inhabitants of Arda can bridge the gap of experience, knowledge, and difference to achieve not only personal connection, but indeed visionary potential. Significantly, it is the knowledge or lore of Andreth that teaches or enlightens Finrod about the possibilities for a transformed, healing future, not only for men and elves, but indeed for all Arda. In his pursuit of Andreth's stunning notion that men were once immortal, Finrod begins to develop an idea that answers Andreth's despair, a despair born of her witness to death and the overweening power of Morgoth in Middle-earth, with a claim to men's ultimate freedom and power. He asks, "Has it never entered your thoughts, Andreth, that out there in the long ages past, ye may have put yourself out of the Valar's care and beyond reach of their help? Or even that ye, the children of men, were not a matter that they could govern, for ye were too great. Yea, I mean this, and do not only flatter your pride, too great, sole masters of yourselves within Arda, under the hand of the One." Although Finrod gently corrects Andreth's view of the abandonment of the Valar, reminding her that the blame should go to Morgoth, he quickly moves to an intriguing reversal of the assumptions both of Andreth and elves concerning men. What if, he theorizes, men were beyond the Valar, more powerful than elves because more free of Arda? What might this freedom and greatness mean, both for Andreth's sense of despair and for elves' belief that when Arda ends, their annihilation comes? These and other provocative questions lead Finrod beyond his worldview and beyond the boundaries of even his vast knowledge. He has made such a leap not by asserting his preeminence as a Noldor or elf lord, but by privileging what he has heard from Andreth. In so doing, Finrod values her wisdom about the terrible and potentially transformative notion of what lies beyond Arda. She cannot yet see how the wound of men's mortality could be restorative, but she has spoken of it and revealed her despair. She too has valued her discussion partner enough to open the door for what Finrod will call Estelle, the kind of trust that, quote, "If we are indeed the Eruhim, the children of the One, then he will not suffer himself to be deprived of his own, not by an enemy, not even by ourselves," end quote. Despite these barriers to their communication, the two continue to explore the question of men's mortality, whether punishment or gift, even as Andreth calls Morgoth Lord of this world. Shocking. Rather than dismiss Andreth's lore out of hand, Finrod pursues its ramifications by noting that, quote, "Never even in a night have we believed that Morgoth could prevail against the children of Eru, to change the doom of a whole people of the children. If he could do that in Eru's despite, then greater and more terrible is he by far than we guessed. Then all the valor of the Noldor is but presumption and folly. If your tale is true, then all in Arda is vain," end quote. In response to his exclamation, Andreth notes that only now, with an understanding of the precarity of the created world and of the futility of his mighty kindred's resistance, can Finrod truly comprehend the despair of men. To toil, to be the seekers, and yet to finally realize that the light may not withstand the darkness of Morgoth, explains Andreth's grim outlook. Quote, "When you, Finrod, are made to face death in thought only, as we know it in deed and in thought all our lives, at once you fall into despair," end quote. For Finrod, the summation of the conversation comes in the form of a vision that centers Andreth's understanding, with men at the center and with hope for both the elves and for Arda. Building on their agreement that men sense a space beyond Arda, Finrod and Andreth then speculate as to how the Hroa and Feia, the body and spirit of men, might in some other place be made whole again as part of their role. Andreth responds to this notion, quote, "You speak strange words, Finrod, which I have not heard before, yet my heart is stirred as if by some truth that it recognizes even if it does not understand," end quote. In response to her despair about the inevitability of death for men, Finrod offers hope, a hope that derives from first accepting the lore of her people, the wisdom Andreth holds. Assuming Andreth's premise that spirit and body of men are one, Finrod queries that perhaps the Feia shall have the power to uplift the Hroa into an endurance everlasting beyond yea and beyond time. Thus would Arda, or part thereof, be healed not only of the taint of Melkor, but released from the limits that were set for it in the vision of Eru, of which the Valar speak. Therefore I say that if this can be believed, then mighty indeed under Eru were men made in their beginning. Finrod reasserts his notion that the children of men are more than followers, more than doomed to death. Rather, they were made to complete and perfect or make anew the Arda Mard they both inhabit. In becoming whole in body and spirit, their healing would invoke the healing of the world itself. While they cannot resolve whether such a possible restoration will come within Arda or in an ideal Arda that only men can sense, Finrod's consideration of the possible healing of the world brings him joy. Quote, "So now my heart leaps up as at the hearing of good news," end quote. Just as his grasping of the vision comes through prioritizing Andreth's wisdom, his conclusion reverses the power positions of the kindreds. "This then I propound was the errand of men, not the followers, but the heirs and fulfillers of all, to heal the marring of Arda, already foreshadowed before their devising, and to do more, as agents of the magnificence of Eru, to enlarge the music and surpass the vision of the world." Rather than merely a weaker version of elves, men are children whose task it will be to bring Arda to fulfillment, something elves did not even conceive of in their lore. If men were not made to die and can sense another, more whole and complete world, the elf lord posits, then they have a fate and a role that will reharmonize the music that Melkor sought to ruin. Finrod suggests that men will go beyond merely escaping the world, but rather will remake the world more perfect than even the Valar can foresee. They will enlarge and surpass the vision as the unexpected resolution to the despair that the marring wrought in every being in Arda. Men may open the door from Arda marred to Arda healed. For elves, immortal so long as Arda lasts, this vision offers the possibility of continuing in a new way, an alternative to annihilation. "I beheld as a vision Arda remade, and there the Eldar, completed but not ended, could abide in the present forever, and there walk maybe with the children of men, their deliverers, and sing to them such songs as, even in the bliss beyond bliss, should make the green valleys ring and the everlasting mountaintops to throb like harps." As Bruce Charlton has noted, quote, "This is Tolkien's vision of heaven pictured in the context of Arda. Andreth's destiny lies beyond the world, and Finrod dares to hope that this is true for elves also," end quote. In this Arda healed, according to Finrod's vision, men have delivered elves, restored the beauty of the created world, and elves repay this deliverance with art. Their talents now serve the children of men, who alone possess the ability to bring about transcendence. Andreth stops Finrod's musings here to ask what the elves would say when they were not singing, and Finrod laughs and replies, "Why, wise lady, I think that we should tell you the tales of the past and of Arda that was before, of the perils and great deeds and the making of the Silmarils. We were the lordly ones then. But ye would then be at home, looking at all things intently as your own. Ye would be the lordly ones." Once again, Finrod comes to the divine vision through a process of hearkening to the other, of listening to and valuing the lore and tradition Andreth has shared. In fact, by her sharing of the marring of men, Andreth has invited Finrod to a deeper understanding of her people. He has listened and believed, with the result that he can now envision another place, time, and Arda, wherein the elves honor and entertain men with their great gift of tale and story. The text of which the Athrabeth is part, the Silmarillion, would then be but a shadow of the tale Finrod envisions the elves telling and singing to men in Arda healed. While the elves were once lordly, they will now sing and tell the tale of those days to the lordly ones, the deliverers, the children of men. Rather than framed as a tragic downfall for elves, Finrod instead rejoices at the transformation Andreth's wisdom has brought. His description of men at home looking at all things intently as your own in the transformed Arda suggests a wise elf lord looking up to, rather than down paternalistically at the Atani. Without their deliverers, Finrod appears to see, elves cannot move beyond the discord of Melkor, Arda marred. As the discussion moves to a close, Finrod and Andreth shift their topic from the cosmic to the personal. Andreth reveals her love for Finrod's brother, and in turn, Finrod explains that Ainur indeed loves Andreth, but as a warrior, he could not seek union with her amidst the siege of Angband. Andreth's personal devotion to Ainur and her friendship with Finrod orient the close of the discussion to reflect a familiar theme in Tolkien, that the crossings of individuals and their ability to pity and seek aid from one another can ultimately alter the course of the world. As Finrod muses, "Yes, wise woman, maybe it was ordained that we Quendi and ye Atani, ere the world grows old, should meet and bring news one to another. And so we should learn of the hope from you. Ordained indeed that thou and I, Andreth, should sit here and speak together across the gulf that divides our kindreds, so that while the shadow still broods in the north, we should not be wholly afraid." The larger fate of the world, or at least the hope in the healing of Arda that will come through men as deliverers, turns on these two meeting in love to speak to one another. While their words cannot magically render Morgoth defeated, their connection has brought a vision that restores hope. As to that Estelle or hope, Finrod closes with a reminder and a supplication. Quote, "But you, Andreth, are not for Arda. Whither you go, may you find light. Await us there, my brother and me," end quote. While the text consistently positions Finrod as learning, as listening, as seeking new wisdom from the wise woman, Andreth, there are significant portions of the Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth that reinforce the hierarchy of elves over men. Tolkien's notes remain elf-centric, as he claims the purpose of the text prioritizes Finrod, quote, "to exhibit the generosity of Finrod's mind, his love and pity for Andreth, and the tragic situations that must arise in the meeting of elves and men," end quote. Andreth's anger and her resentment at being treated as a child evokes the benevolent paternalism so familiar in colonial encounters, and Finrod consistently corrects her claims about Morgoth's power or her doubts concerning the Valar as from on high, her superior in wisdom. Likewise, Andreth's complaints about men's separation from the light and the bliss of Aman evokes a sort of missionary narrative, tales of good news that men can never fully share. Finally, Finrod's conclusion that her bitterness primarily stems from her position as a woman thwarted in love degrades her position as a wise woman into a somewhat tired and sexist convention. Even Finrod's curiosity about the wisdom of men might suggest an ethnographic mindset, eager to quantify and explain a more simple culture, or worse, to co-opt that lore and culture for the benefit of elven wisdom. These are certainly valid readings and problematic eruptions in the text. Nevertheless, the power of the discussion comes not from reinforcing hierarchies or power positions of either race or gender, but from subverting them. The vision of an Arda healed, Tolkien's heaven in his secondary world, grows from a privileging of men and women as deliverers, as powerful as the lordly ones, separated by experience of mortal and immortal, by their views about hope, by their conception of death, and by their views of who holds ultimate power in Middle-earth. The conversation itself offers a brief glimpse into the ways the diverse peoples of Middle-earth may speak to one another across difference. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Cami, that was absolutely fantastic to end on one of Tolkien's final essays as well. So thank you very much for coming and talking to us about the essay as well. Now, questions. Now, as a reminder, if anyone does have any questions, so this is the final paper. So if you, yeah, I just saw that big one appear right there. So if you do have any questions for Cami, then please do post them in the Q&A function as well. So let's get started. Okay, so Cami, round one.
Yes.
Do you believe the ability of men, humanity, to create and change the world beyond the visions and the Ainulindale are linked with Melkor's desire to sing a music of his own?
What a fascinating question. I had not thought of that, but I will admit that I began the paper with a certain framing, elf-centric, I do admit, and then went back to it and really had to reorganize my vision and sort of get behind Andreth, which I think is what Raoul, I believe, is asking us to do as well with Melkor, to think about that desire to do something new, to do something outside. And the text potentially is recapturing that desire as valid through this myth of men. Really, really interesting.
Yeah, perfectly put as well. Okay, round two. Thank you for this wonderful presentation about one of my favorite texts. I've always felt like one of the main tensions of this discussion has to do with epistemological questions. Who knows what? On which side of wisdom should one rely? Is the folkloric human wisdom as trustworthy as the Eldarin one? And I can't help connect it to Ioreth's own wisdom in The Lord of the Rings. Of course, it resonates with Finrod's kindness, but also with the patronizing attitudes of the Noldor. Do you think the Eldar, mostly the Noldor of the First Age, could have been able to accept a wisdom which doesn't come from Aman?
Pauline, fantastic question. And that sort of traces the journey I took back through the text, being a lover of Finrod, having to set that aside and see how much of the text actually is quite paternalistic. And the beauty of it is that Andreth will not back down. She won't back down from her description of Morgoth as Lord of the world, or her description of the Valar as basically, who are they to us? They never called us, they never asked us to come to the light. And it feels as if Finrod is eventually in the discussion, validating that to some degree. But to your point, he also admits that most elves are incapable of seeing the wisdom of men as anything near to their wisdom. And that's that's where the tension or the eruption that I was talking about at the end is not really resolved. So the text feels like it's working towards a balancing of the two wisdoms. Whether or not it achieves that, I think is up for question.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, and I'm just looking across my email where I've been sent a question. I'm curious about how. Okay, so I need to rephrase this. Sorry. So the questioner is curious about how you see the threads of this paper and the myth echoing through the ages. So all the way from the elves fading from Middle Earth. So the idea of the myth echoing through the ages like the elves fading.
Right. Interesting. Because I always think of it sort of as echoing through what we eventually find out about Turin's role, for example, that he's going to come back and he is going to be actually the man, not the elf, not the Noldor, not the Valar, who defeats Morgoth / Melkor. So I have thought of it in that way as kind of being positioned to forecast that event. So yeah, if we think about the fading, that might suggest that Finrod is not successful in imparting his vision to his own people, potentially, that they are disappearing. Of course, you might also think of it as they're disappearing only to return with the help of this vision and with the help of men. But as so often happens in Tolkien, that never gets connected or that never gets resolved. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, super. Okay, and I'll just pause for 1 second just in case someone were typing out a further question. So just bear with for 1 sec. I think we might just about be there.
Great.
In that case. Okay. Right, unless something random. Oh, you know what? As literally, there's always that one. There's always that one. Okay, right. We've got one more question for you. Round 4. Okay. So the questioner is curious how about how you see the elven policy of not marrying during wartime. So this seems remarkably prophylactic to the questioner. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Really interesting, Kevin. I thought it was really helpful reading. Of course, there are copious notes from both Tolkien and Christopher after this essay that remind us that the discussion comes before any marriage of elf or man has occurred. And so in that way, from outside of the primary or the secondary world, we can see the text sort of getting ready for that to happen. And so the passage I had from Tolkien in the paper, that he sees the crossings of elves and men as in some way inherently tragic, although full of love. We see that thematic going through this discussion between Finrod and Andreth, and then we see it between all of the marriages, the intermarriages, if you will. As far as the war, not marrying during war, yeah, that seems in some ways like a post explanation for certain things that happen, particularly in the First Age. And I'm not sure what to do with it in this context. It's especially important, I think, to think about, though, because this is our only example of man, the human being a woman, and the immortal being a male elf. And so that's something that I think we might want to fold in Tolkien's gender positions, his views about binary gender or not, into that. So like Chris, I think that remains to be an essay that someone should write. What do we make of this elves don't mate in war throwaway idea? I think there's a lot to dig through there.
That's the third paper that's been requested by our speakers. So I think that our audience needs to get researching and writing. At this rate, there's going to be a new book. Okay, and right, so Another question, so a rather fun one this time. I'm quite curious about the answer to this as well. In the end, knowing the full history of both men and elves, which one would you prefer to be?
Mm. Well, I've already confessed, if you will, that I'm elf-centric. So I think many of us that spent our lives reading and teaching and then writing lean elf, because as we all get to a certain point in our lives, we realize we'll never finish reading all of the things that we have on our list that we keep adding to. Even today, there have been so many incredible interweavings and interconnections. So if only for that, I would love to have an extended time here to keep doing that work. So guilty as elf, guilty as charged.